All right. Well, welcome everybody to our Cyberwise chat. I'm Diana Graber, founder of Cyber Civics and Cyberwise and author of Raising Humans in a Digital World. I'm here, as always, with Dr. Pamela Rutledge, who is the director of the Media Psychology Research Center. And we're really excited to welcome our guests today, teachers Sony Albright and Joshua Berman from the Shining Mountain Waldorf School in Boulder, Colorado. They are both from the, well, Sony actually is our enrollment director. So she's wearing two hats today because she helps us onboard our teachers to cyber civics. And Joshua is a longtime teacher, as is Sony, of the curriculum. So you'll probably hear a little bit about that today. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with our topic, we're talking about Wait Till 8th. And this is the popular campaign that encourages parents to band together, sign a pledge, and delay giving their children a smartphone until at least 8th grade. So we get asked a lot about this, our opinions on this. We get asked by big schools and little schools and big districts and Waldorf schools. And we do have a lot of opinions on it. And that's why we're meeting today to talk about this. Before we get started, a couple things. I will be checking the chat box. So if anyone has comments or questions, please put them in there. I will promise you I will read them and we'll get to them as we have time. And I'd like to start here with some numbers first that are important. 95% of teens have smartphones. The average age at which children receive their first phone is 11.6, with phone acquisition growing steeply between 10.7 and 12.5 years of age. And just as a point of reference, 8th graders are generally between 13 and 14 years of age. So that's what we're looking at here today. And because we like to keep our chat psychology first, because we think that's really important to always remember that it's not about the tools, it's about what happens between kids' ears. Let's talk about that for a minute. Between our teachers who are with kids this age all the time and Pam, who is an expert on this topic, what is going on with middle school kids that their interest in digital media is at its peak?
Well, let me just start by laying some context, and then you guys jump in with examples to illustrate these because we don't want to bore people to death. The first thing that parents need to realize is for these kids, there's no difference between online and offline, and these mobile devices become their portals to their social world. Everything happens through there, connecting with their friends, accessing their assignments, doing their homework, and knowing about what's important to their peers in popular culture. Well, who are the big bands, all the music? All of these things are important, and they all impact identity development. What do you guys see?
So one thing absolutely. And also, we're talking about kids, of course, today, but this also is parents as well. They do all of their socializing, all of their planning, all of their work through digital devices too. So first of all, monkey see, monkey do, right? They are getting, and that also means that the ways to communicate in a home nowadays are very much pared down to digital media access. So a lot of people don't have landlines anymore, and it's not like easy for kids to fight. So in terms of kids like seeing the online and offline world together, that's what they tell me in the classroom, is that like, what other options are there? What other ways would you? So it is ubiquitous, and certainly also ubiquitous with parents as much as I see it with students.
Yeah, and let me just interrupt for 1 second, because thanks to our friend Darren Lauer, I have discovered that our chat is disabled. So we've had some Zoom things happening today with things being disabled. So if you do have a question, if you would please put it in the Q&A instead. Thank you, Darren, for letting me know. I'm sorry, Sony, to interrupt you. Josh, what do you see with these middle schoolers?
I would add, in addition to like those targeted activities, they're using it to communicate or to do homework or to watch shows, that there's this new, not that new, but just the scroll, which is maybe it starts off as entertainment, or it starts off as a friend sends you a link, and just the way that some of the apps suck you in to, and I'm guilty of this too, to just start scrolling through those videos. So it's like partially entertainment, but then partially just kind of mind numbing, really just spending the time that way. And if they're not aware of setting time limits for themselves, and they can do that, then it really can lead to yeah, a little bit less, not great results, that they just end up spending more time than they planned on and aren't really doing anything.
You know, that's such a great point, Josh, about the scrolling, because the human brain is actually hardwired to pay attention to things that change, to pay attention to things that move. So it's very easy to get sucked in, as you say. And when kids understand that, it helps them set those limits better than if they think something's wrong with them, that, you know, they just can't put their phone down, that this is really sort of built into that system. I want to just add that in the context of all this social stuff, developmentally, the primary task of tweens and teens is social. They're trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to emancipate from what psychologists like to call the nuclear family. You can use that at your next cocktail party. And they're trying to figure out who they are, how they are being seen by others, because that's an important part for all of us to figure out. So they do this by observing behaviors and by experimenting.
Yeah, and I think really what we have to remember here is it's such a weird time to talk about this, because during COVID, when kids weren't together, thank goodness for their phones, because all that work that needs to be done, the separating from family, figure out who you are, self-display, all of that, if it didn't happen online, it wouldn't happen, and it would be super stunted. So I think that we have to keep that into consideration. And now we're at this place where schools are wondering, do we turn back the clock to pre-COVID? I kind of don't think we can. And then, like, I really wonder if we want to, because there's so much important learning that takes place in middle school about how to use the device well. And I think if we just put the device on a shelf and say, don't look at it till you're 14 years old, first of all, good luck with that, right? One kid has a device, they're all going to be on it. And number two is you're going to miss a lot of really important learning opportunities. And I kind of want to get to what those are, because you've got kids ripe for this stuff. Let's feed them what they need. And I would turn to you, Sony and Joshua, like let's go start with the very youngest of kids. What do they need to learn to in order to use these devices super productively and positively? Sony, what do you think?
I mean, I think, the first place that I start when I think about, is my child ready or is my student ready? And I'll say this is the most common question that parents ask me as a cyber civics teacher: when should they get one? I think your student and what they're capable of, but an expression of self-control. Do they have the ability to manage their person and stop things that they really love to do and know when they've had enough? Do they have guidance? Do they have open line of conversation with you, the adult? So often parents think, I don't have anything to offer my student in the digital space because I don't know anything about TikTok, or I don't know, I've never been on whatever. Not true. You have your family values that you hold dear. What are you trying to give to your student? You absolutely are the perfect person to provide guidance as they're going through, but it requires you to be in conversation with your student all along the way, and to be open. And curiosity, I think, is such a big part. Pam, I know we've talked about that already. I think parents that come at it with like, well, what are you doing in there? If you ever wanted your child to overshare, this is how you get them to do that. What happens in those? How do you work this thing? What is, this app that everybody's talking about? Can you tell me about it? Their eyes would probably light up and they'd be thrilled to tell you more than you needed to know about it. But so a good relationship with your student, I think, and then also just clear guidelines. Every house is going to look different. Mine looks like we don't use devices in the car. We're too close proximity to each other to be staring at our phones. It just feels rude to me. So that's just one of our rules. 9 o'clock, everything's plugged in. That's another one of our rules. That might not work in your house, but to have those clear guidelines and then some trust and high expectations outside of the guidelines, I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, it makes me think that those are all the things you learn maybe with the phone, right? You set those boundaries. And if you don't learn all those boundaries when you're in that close proximity, which in high school, face it, your kid's going to be away from you way more then you hand them a phone and you aren't there for those teachable moments on how to learn self-control.
And Sony, you mentioned something earlier that I'd really like to emphasize. As you're setting these family rules, what the rules for the kids have to be the rules for you too. You can't say no phones at dinner and then pull out your phone at dinner. So you really have to model the behavior that you want to see in these kids. You know, I love your example of, you know, no phones in the car. I can't tell you how many people text and drive. So it's really important to have those for everyone.
So
You know,
I
kids
have
share
a
with
question.
me all the time in cyber civics how scary that is for them. How many parents they know don't actually follow the rules of cyber civics, like in the way that we talk about those kinds of things. They're really kind of appalled at grown-up behavior. And so many times they'll ask me to advocate for them in the way of like, can you please tell my parents to not post pictures of me, or to not take pictures of me when I'm sleeping, or other odd things that they say. And that this conversation that we're having today, way to eighth, I mean, we as parents have got to take a good look in the mirror and make sure, exactly as Pamela's saying, that we are setting good examples of limits, of a balanced life, of the kind of expectations that we have on our students.
You know, Sony, I'm glad you brought that up because I just finished teaching the reputation unit to 6th graders, and we probably got segued for like half an hour. And same thing, the kids are like, can you talk to my mom about please have her not post any more pictures of me? I'm thinking,
Well, it's, you know,
I
but
could
it's
start a side hustle.
right, exactly. But it's so interesting because the people who are parents now grew up with the digital, right? And so they didn't have to think about those kind of boundaries except for, you know, among their friends. But now that they're parents, they have to step out of this is about me and start thinking about the implications for the kids and actually who owns those images.
Right. So I have a question for you guys. This is from Ingrid. My 11-year-old is still in the minority, has no phone, but does have an iPad. I have been holding out because I know it will become an appendage, glued to her hand, always there as a distraction. Whereas the iPad is too bulky to carry around and easier for me to police. Advice about making this transition. Who wants to take that one? Joshua, why don't you take that one?
It's hard to say, yes, exactly. You absolutely should wait till 8th to switch to the phone. Maybe it's 8th for you. Maybe it's different from that. I definitely would encourage if the iPad is there and it's serving some functions and there's audiobooks and some whatever they're using it for, to try to stay with that. I know my kids at one point were, when they all have felt left out and they've all come to me with I'm the only one, when they're usually not. So that's one thing. But as part of it too is, I mean, when my 8th grader, I mean, she got a phone at the end of 8th grade, and what she felt like she was missing out on was the group chats. Everybody was coming in and talking about the group chats, and she was feeling left out of this group chat. And when she finally got it and got on, it took about a couple of weeks for her to realize it was all these monosyllabic chats and emojis.
Like.
She realized she really wasn't missing anything there. And I don't know if that's carried into some other realms there too. But you're going back to that, what to teach the youngest kids and those 6th graders. I also just finished the reputation unit with my 6th grade class, and I happen to have a 6th grade daughter who's in the class too, so I get to do a double cyber civics teacher and parent duty there, which is fantastic. And today, I mean, this morning we learned about ethical thinking, and they get to learn what is ethical thinking. Oh, it just means thinking about the other person and your actions and how they might affect other people. And it really got these students to articulate, one, the idea that people can hide behind a screen and be different, even though we haven't even got to that lesson yet, but they came up with this. And 2, the fact that we're going through scenarios and the students are evaluating So-and-so had a sleepover and posted a photo and some other people weren't there, so they felt left out. So they felt bad. And then the students, they realize it's not clear cut and they have to put themselves on this grid, on the spectrum of whether it's helpful or harmful or intentional or unintentional. And you really saw them thinking this through in a way that you realize they wouldn't have if we didn't do this activity. So just that idea of, like you said, like the ways that we can stop some of that blurring between real life and the online and teach some of those really significant differences before they're on there, such as how it's different when you're looking into somebody's eyes and saying something versus only seeing text, and what does that mean? And they came up with all the answers, that you can't see if your words affect them as much. So really just all those exercises, and especially going through scenarios, whether it's in a cyber civics class or a parent coming up with, well, what would you do if somebody posted this? How would you react? So that they're not faced with those always when it's in the heat of the moment and it's the first time they're seeing it.
I'm glad you brought up that ethical thinking lesson. I'm sorry, Pam, just real quick, because I just taught that lesson as well on Tuesday. And I learned so much by listening to the kids and their struggles. And the one that really hit me so deeply is we have that one scenario about a boy who's playing a video game and his friend's getting picked on. And he doesn't speak up for his friend. He just watches it happen. And wow, every kid in the class had a different opinion on how to react to that. And the discussion went to, this happens all the time, Mrs. Graber, you don't understand. This is typical for games. Everyone's picked on and you can't stand up for your friend because number one, then you'll get picked on and it's really awkward. We never know what to do. And then to hear them talk about, well, what if you're the person picked on? You would want to have someone to stand up for you. The long and short of it is having that discussion in a classroom made the kids more empathetic to the person that was the target. And perhaps in the future, they're going to be better about careful with their words in games, but also maybe standing up for the person. But it's powerful to have kids have these conversations.
And what I just wanted to emphasize, which I think is the real beauty of what you have designed and what you all are teaching, is that by taking someone through a scenario, especially at these young brains, it really allows them to learn in a more hands-on way than if you just told them. It's so important for them to go through these little exercises, because then if it happens, that behavior will come back and those decisions and that stuff will come back in a completely different way than if they were just, being lectured, or if they're now 14 and they're trying to learn all of this stuff at the same time.
Boy, we have a lot of questions here. So I'm going to take this one because it's a short one. What is your opinion on starter devices such as Gab, Pinwheel, and Bark? Pam, why don't you grab that one?
I think parents need to be very careful that they're not restricting things they should be teaching. To me, the wait until 8th is kind of a cheap way out of parenting. There's a lot of important stuff that has to go on, whether or not they have a device, talking about it, dealing with these different aspects of it that need to be talked about so that you build up that line of trust. So I'm in general not favor of setting limits by artificially make how fast the car can go like a governor. I'm in favor of having a conversation and a tech agreement and making sure that the limits are very clear in the family so that they can gradually be changed.
Can I add one thing on there, Pam?
Sure.
We have a Gap phone and it's kind of our house phone. It's replaced that. I have 4 kids ranging from 5th grade all the way to junior in high school. And it serves the perfect purpose in some ways. For us, a phone is a financial commitment and an expensive thing that isn't just willy-nilly handed out because it's expensive. And also along with just the developmental milestones that come with it. And this sort of feeds into Ingrid's question too, but I really think, the is my child ready? Everyone else has one. 2 questions. Does everyone else really have one? And the second question, like you said, well, she would have it glued to her hand after that. Well, there's some parenting that can happen in there to allow you to say that's not acceptable in our house. It's not acceptable for you to constantly have your phone tethered to your hand. So when are the times in which you are engaged? When do you value, how do you value your time with your family? How do you value your creative pursuits? When do you get exercise? All of those things. And so there's, exactly as Pamela was saying, an opportunity for conversation. And there can be limits in terms of on-ramping. I don't police my junior the way I police my fifth grader for obvious reasons.
You know, what I want to get to today, and there's so many good questions here, but I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about research. This is really important because I know parents will say to me, well, I read here so-and-so that technology causes this anxiety in kids. And I'm like, well, where did you read that? What research? And I think we have to be so important when we point to research because there's all kinds of research out there. And it's important to look at how many people are in the study, how long-term was the study, read the entire study. One that really gets me is when people call technology devices or smartphones addicting, and technically that's not correct. They're not listed as a true addiction by the medical community. If anything, kids are addicted to each other, not to their devices. So Pam, we had this discussion earlier. What do you want to add to this?
Well, I just want to make sure that people think about when there's research, first of all, it's being reported by a journalist most of the time. The whole goal of a journalist is to get you to read their headline. So they're going to lead with the most exciting or the sexiest point. The other thing is there is no media research out there that I know of that is causal. In other words, it's hard to measure media use. It tends to be reports and, monitoring things. It is not a before and after event. So it is related, but it is not necessarily the cause of something. It doesn't cause something. It doesn't prove something. All research is about probabilities. The other thing is that it's really important to pay attention to these words researchers like to use. Significant, right? Significant just means they got a little number in their stats results. It doesn't mean it's material. So there was a study out of the UK that looked at the impact of mobile devices on sleep. The finding was statistically significant. Phones did impact sleep. The material effect of it was 3%. So that should tell us, yeah, it has a little effect, but something else is going on that's impacting teens' sleep. It isn't just, if I lower screen time, that's going to solve my problem. So it's very important to see what they're measuring, how they're measuring it, and if it sort of makes sense, not just read the headline from the journalist.
Right.
No, not bashing on journalists here, but
yeah, and a really good example of this, I think, is we all hear about Facebook depression. People are on Facebook too much. It has depression. Well, first of all, that little study was done on adults, not teens. Secondly, if you really dive into the research, it exists on a bell curve. Those that have too much Facebook time are depressed, but those who have zero social media contact are depressed because they're cut off from their peers. So that's kind of the big story that sometimes doesn't get captured in a headline. So I think that's really important to look at. And I did want to address the anxiety because we do know that there is this increase in anxiety and depression amongst teens. And our last chat that Pam and I did with those wonderful authors of the new book out of Harvard really reminded me that teens are largely on their phones giving comfort to one another, or they feel like they need to be there for their friends that are going through a hard time or don't have somebody else to talk to. So in some instances, that phone is a relief from a really chaotic world that they're living in. So I think as parents and teachers, we have to always keep that in the back of our minds and really do our best to prepare these kids to use their phones that way. And I think all of that, as we've talked about today, these lessons that you have to do, whether you're a parent or a teacher, it's mandatory. Like it's learning how to drive a car. So, Sony, you had a great donut analogy that I'm going to ask you to share. Your donut analogy from yesterday.
Yeah, well, I always tell parents whenever they ask me like how much and what you do, and you can literally replace the word phone or technology even with donut. And anybody who thinks that donuts are the most unhealthy thing in the world, like when does it become unhealthy? When you have 10 of them? When you have one of them? What if you just have one bite? And there's so many different ways in which like we look at it and demonize the thing. And in fact, like we should be exploring, like if you ate 12 donuts, why? What's going on with you? How are you feeling underneath everything? What other things are happening in your life that would compel you to do that? Because something's off for you if that's the case. So I like to look at it much more in a moderation standpoint, and that's a hard thing, right? It took me a while to get there as a parent. It took me a while to get there as a teacher, to think about this very changing landscape in terms of what's acceptable. And, you know, there's so much negative information out there, and our kids are looking at it so differently. So it's time for us to really be shifting from it's all bad to what's happening here. What is really the whole picture?
Yeah, and I was laughing, sorry, not at what you were saying, Sony, but we have a comment from Darren, and he said, "Oh, being an ex-cop, did you just say donut?" That was cute. All right, I do want to, I'm so sorry. I thought we'd be able to get to all the questions, but I do have a perfect one for Josh and Sony. Either of you can take this. I was about to register my daughter at a Waldorf school. By the entrance at the school, all the 8th grade students were on their phones. The scenario made me so disappointed and hopeless. I gave up registering my daughter at that school. My youngest daughter would probably have access to their oldest kids' phones. Who wants to take that one? Josh, you want to grab that one?
Sure. I mean, it's a tough one. You know, at our school, if an 8th grader has a phone, they're allowed to call a parent on it after school. And, you know, I wonder, I would recommend checking with what the school's policy is on it. You know, sometimes they cluster together and they take them out and they're not calling their parents, and we have to tell them to disperse or put it away. So first I would check and make sure that that is, you know, not necessarily the norm there. And I know some schools you have to put your phone in a lockbox or a bucket before you go in the room. Some use, you know, have different guidelines for that. You know, if that school is doing a good job at teaching cyber civics and preparing students and teaching critical thinking, and maybe the enforcement of their cell phones out on you know, on the hill after school wasn't so good that day, I would say one definitely outweighs the other, and not to take that that scene too seriously, but definitely to address it and to ask the school what's up with that. But you know, at any school, I mean, at our school, and we are at a Waldorf school where there's not much tech in the classroom up through the middle school. And then in the middle school, we start using projectors and teaching about the tech and allowing certain kinds of it there in a pretty good, healthy on-ramping way, I think. So I would, yeah, I mean, that would be my advice, to look into and find out a little bit more about that. Sony?
Can I add something in there, Diana?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great question, Constance. I would say, you know, Waldorf kids are just like kids everywhere else. And honestly, at Cyber Civics, we work with teachers from every type of school you can imagine, and they are all encountering the same issues with kids and technology. The difference to me happens when you have an open communication with kids, and when there are adults that are leading the conversation about ethics, morality, appropriateness, balance, health, the whole picture. That is the thing I would be looking for. Not do they have a cell phone policy? And I'll be really frank, no, technology is not a strategy. It never works. On-ramping is honestly the best thing that can happen. It's healthy. It feels like you as a family are deciding when is this appropriate for us, but thinking about ways to on-ramp that match their developmental stage.
Yeah, and last thing I would say on that topic, Constance, is about 98% of the Waldorf schools in the United States teach cyber civics. So at least those kids are learning, hopefully, to how to use them well. And if they're not, they should be calling us, right, Sony?
Well,
And number two is, can
Can I just
One
normalize,
cell phone, they all have a cell phone, right?
Diana, can I just normalize that a little bit? Because wouldn't you be surprised if after school, the kids didn't all want to contact their friends? And if in fact the cell phone is the portal to their social world, then it's most likely that they're contacting the friends that aren't at school, or they're, sharing a YouTube video that somebody thought was funny. So it's really I would be concerned depending upon the activity, but I think it's a big mistake to just assume because they're holding a phone, something bad's going on. Because as Sony said, if they've been trained, there's a lot that can go on there that's very positive. And so it's important not to just knee jerk on the device.
Really good point. I just want to say we have some great questions that we're not going to have time to get to today because we want to be respectful of your time. However, please reach out to our support line, support@cybercivics.com. I promise you that I will respond, or one of us will respond to those questions, so you don't feel left out today. But I do want to take this last few minutes and go around our little group here and each of us give our takeaways on this topic. I'm going to start with you, Josh. I know I'm putting you on the spot to go first. We do this every time, and I think I forgot to tell you, but if you just had to give some quick takeaways to parents today, what would they be?
I would say just really think about that concept of on-ramping and some of those, just the most basic things that need to be taught before the device. I mean, in the curriculum, we even go back through the history of technology and look at what is technology and how this is only a tool, and teaching the kids how to use it is going to be the key. And again, that teaching them how to be, what it means to be a good citizen in real life, what it means to be compassionate and respectful and responsible and courageous. Those we teach those in the curriculum as 5 principles of citizenship, and the kids name those in their real life, and then say, well, what does that look like online, and find other avenues to be able to do that, so that they can lessen the blur between the real life and the online. And it's going to be harder and harder to do when they have their virtual reality goggles on, and as this becomes more and more immersive. So I think that's really the key, is to focus on those human capacities and communication, and how you treat the other, and just the basic concept of empathy, and for them to understand that, understanding those concepts first, and then understanding how that changes when you are on a screen communicating with someone.
Well said. Thank you. All right, Sony, 3 takeaways from you.
I would just really encourage parents to define their family values and use that as their path for on-ramping. What is the place for your family, your comfort level, the things that are, very specifically important to your family, and think about how your student growth trajectory and maturity can fit into their digital technology life through that lens. And the other thing is, stay curious. You will never regret that as a parent, is talking to your kids and asking questions. I love to go to bed at 9 p.m. If I could, I would always do that. But somehow my teens are oversharing between the hours of 9:30 and 10:45. So I'm doing it because those are magical moments, and those are really amazing ways in which I can continue to have conversations with them and ask them questions that time they'll actually answer. And I'd strongly encourage parents to do that, because digital technology is not part of that. It is absolutely part of that.
Thank you, Sony. That was excellent. All right, Pam, your takeaways.
Okay, so I want to just build on what Sony said. That conversation and trust is so important. When you pick an artificial time, like the wait until 8, you're setting yourself up for some conflict. That conflict destroys trust. That's exactly the opposite of what you want with a kid. It doesn't mean you have to give them a phone when they're 3, but it means you need to have a conversation like Sony's talking about, and onboarding and listening to what it is that's on their mind, so that you can decide when the right time is. No 2 kids are the same. No 2 kids have the same use patterns, and no 2 kids are equally incapable or capable at a given age. So it's so important to have that open line of communication.
Excellent. And I just want to say real quick, we do have something called digital on-ramps as a PDF on our website. So please feel free to download it. It's also referred to in the first chapter of my book. And my takeaways are, like you guys have already said, abstinence doesn't work. If there's one kid with a cell phone, they virtually all have a cell phone because they'll be all around it wondering what the magic thing is that they're missing out on. Number two, there is a research study that's pretty good. I read it carefully. And it shows that kids of parents who limit, that do not let them have technology till later, are, this is again, is the kids are twice as likely as the children of mentors to access porn, to post rude or hostile comments online. They're also 3 times as likely to go online and impersonate a classmate, peer, or adult. So I think, again, that underscores the need for teaching kids how to use this wisely. And finally, don't be afraid. It's just a tool. And that is a great segue to our next chat, because the new tool that we all are hearing so much about is Chat GPT. Parents are freaked out about it. And so we are going to address this next chat. So you'll be hearing about that in the month of February. So, but in the meantime, Sony and Josh, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. For those of you here, Josh literally got to us about 30 seconds before we started because he was teaching 2nd grade Spanish. Talk about a segue. So thank you for that. And Sony, you always do a great job for us. So thank you. And Pam,
Yeah, those kids are very lucky to have you guys in the
very
class.
lucky. Yes.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having us today.
Thanks so much.
And thank you, Pam, as always. And we will talk soon. See you later. Thank you for joining us today. Bye-bye.